The AMD 6400 is a much newer card than the NVIDIA 1050 Ti. Built on a smaller node and with ray tracing support, the 6400 would seem like it would be the faster card overall. But how well does the 1050 Ti that could hold up in 2022? Taking a look at the Firestrike numbers, and they pretty much look as you would expect. The 640 is much faster than the 1050 Ti, 50 to 60% faster in fact. And looking at TimeSpy, and we see pretty much the same story, about 50 to 55% faster in the graphics score tests, which would paint a picture that the 640 would run away in all the gaming benchmarks. But do 3D Mark scores represent actual gaming performance? Starting off with Overwatch and at 1080p low quality settings, both cards are putting up pretty respectable numbers, pretty much always being above 150 FPS at all times. The 640 is a little bit faster on average, with the 1050 Ti only approaching 200 FPS on indoor levels, but overall they're pretty comparable and not the 60% performance delta that 3D Mark was suggesting. Taking a look at Dirt 3 and at ultra quality settings at 1080p, we are seeing about a 20 FPS delta between the two cards. That does mean there's about a 15% performance difference between the two cards, but that's pretty good considering that the cards are about 5 years apart. Moving over into Minecraft Dungeons, and we can see the biggest gains for the 640 so far, 135 FPS versus 108 FPS for the 1050 Ti, a performance gain of 25% for the newer card. This is with everything turned up at 1080p, so you could just disable a few settings and get the same level of performance in both cards, but both are more than playable with these settings. We see a similar performance delta in Control at 1080p low. The 640 is able to achieve 60 FPS with some dips down into the 50s, while the 1050 Ti is more around like the 50 FPS range with some dips down into the 30s, low 40s. Since we're already at the low quality settings, you would need to reduce the resolution down to maybe 900p or so in order to get the same level of performance in the 1050 Ti, so it's definitely a win for the 640. Temtem runs very well on both cards, with both being above 60 FPS outside of asset loading. While there is technically about a 12% performance delta between the two cards, since I do recommend running it at a 60 FPS cap, in practice their performance is identical. Moving over into Apex Legends, and we finally see the 50% gains promised by 3D Mark, with the 640 delivering almost 60 FPS, while the 1050 Ti rarely tops 40 FPS. This is at 1080p on the very high quality settings, so you could reduce a few settings in order to bring up the 1050 Ti performance, and you'd probably still want to do that as well for the 640. So 60 FPS is achievable on both cards, but the 640 can do it with a lot more bells and whistles. Rolled out at 1080p, epic quality settings cannot achieve 60 FPS on the 1050 Ti, which is always surprising when you see how simplistic this game looks, but with all the effects turned up, it does hammer lower end cards. There are a lot of settings that you could lower down without affecting the image quality, and you can also adjust the internal resolution down, and since the graphics are really simplistic, they won't really show. But yeah, a 16% performance advantage to the 640 in this case. On the 1050 Ti, with both dipping down about 20 FPS when you go into cutscenes. So 640 would dip into the 40s, 1050 would dip briefly into the 30s. So the 6400 does have a 20% performance advantage, but you could compensate for this by turning down a few settings on the 1050 Ti or lowering FSR to the quality setting. Now moving over into Halo 2 running on the Master Chief Collection, and we are seeing an average of over 100 FPS on both cards. The performance difference between the two cards is only around 15%, though this is actually because we're running into a CPU limit on the 640 where we aren't really on the 1050 Ti. This is testing with an AMD 530G, so a pretty good pairing in terms of power with these. I wouldn't probably recommend running on a faster CPU in order to get more FPS out of the 640 for, 1 or 2 games. So yeah, more than likely this game will be decided more on your CPU. If Apex Legends was a decided win for the 640, Lost Ark is decidedly a win for the 1050 Ti. At 1080p, very high quality settings, and we're seeing basically 60 FPS locked in both cases, with also about the same percentage GPU usage. There are some moments that it looks like the 640 has a few more frames available to it, but overall the two cards put in basically identical performance, which is a big win for a card released in 2016. Rounding out the game list is Halo Infinite, and this is another decided win for the 640. At 1080p, low quality settings and adaptive resolution turned off, the 640 is spitting out around 63 FPS, while the 1050 Ti is more about 45 FPS. Since we are already at the low quality settings, there aren't really anything we can turn down other than resolution, but enabling adaptive resolution and setting it to 60 FPS target brings you a silky smooth 60 FPS experience on the 1050 Ti. As newer games continue to be released, I'd expect more games to favor the 640 over the 1050 Ti, but as of early 2022, we're only seeing a few examples of the big gains promised by 3D Mark. So if you have a 1050 Ti, the 640 may not be an upgrade, but if you don't have either card, it's probably going to come down to price.